Hello, this is Jeff Kushmark from Infinite Renewals. One of the things I get asked all the time is how do I structure my onboarding team? So we normally come in and we either help companies get up to speed, set the organization up, or make tweaks. Like, hey, and let's set the focus here. Usually, Series A companies start off this way that I'm about to describe, and then sort of amplifies up and goes from there. And I'm usually dealing with SaaS B2B companies, but this can still apply to non B2B. But for the context of what we're talking about, there's just some things around there, especially when you get into integrations and APIs, training, and things like that, that this covers. So without a doubt, I have an article I'll link to as well too, called the Evolution Staff Onboarding or something like that. It's a couple of years old now, where the first thing is that the CSM just does everything, right? And there may be some iterations of this before where it's a receptionist or some other random person that gets in. But let's assume get to the stage where you've got a CSM and they're just doing everything. What normally happens here is that you then amplify that and you say, we've got 3 CSMs now or 5 CSMs, and they're doing everything as well too. And what winds up happening is that nothing gets done well, right? The typical thing that happens is when we start interviewing the CSMs, and the classic quote is, "It's like a bomb goes off in our world, and we really can't focus on anything. It's the big new customer and the big new logo, and suddenly renewals aren't happening, churn rates go up." Usually in this method too, I think CSMs are also doing support too. So the first thing that we normally say to fix this is, okay, let's get them to stop doing support, but I then suggest for them to start doing separate onboarding resource. And I actually pulled up some stats from Insight Financial here that you should see that across their whole portfolio, wow, their whole portfolio, that their coverage looked like this, right? So if you're in the 30 million range, how many dedicated onboarding resources should you have? And that's about 6. And to be honest, that's about right. I'm going to get into some of those reasons why. And then you'll see from 30 to 100 million, you get into that 10 range. Not exactly linear because you're going to pick up some efficiencies with different role types. And then from there, after that, it just kind of starts scaling. I don't exactly love the revenue number. One of the reasons why is that you can have a really complicated, I mean, I'm sure it works out. I actually haven't sat down and done the extrapolation with the math, but what happens is that you can have some very complicated products that you might need separate resources. I have some customers where their average ARR is like 200K. And it's a long 5-6 month process, and you need 3 to 4 resources to go along. And so you might start putting people into pods and things like that. So I don't like to just narrow it right down to the revenue numbers. I like to see and get a baseline for how many people can handle, and then start scaling things out. So let's start taking a look at that. Sorry, these are all sort of blending in here. Let's take some things here where your average implementation is 30 to 90 days. Your average time to value is 60 to 90 days. Notice this isn't time to launch. This is your time to launch would be 90 days. But you should start seeing value within those first 60 days and be sharing what that value is back to the customer, including the people who might not be in all the day-to-day meetings where let's say, for example, you have a nice data visualizer, or you finally got data in, like there's a massive data, you're able to aggregate sources together, or people are starting to configure the API and get integrations going that they previously didn't have. Well, that's a value, and you should really be showing that value up there. But when we get back to the org structure things, what normally happens is suddenly people go around, fine, let's hire that one implementation manager, and they start loading them up with like 10 to 15 implementations. And then from there, they started scaling that number out. I'm going to show what that might look like above. But the normal model here is you start just bringing in more implementation managers, right? So you might have, 2 or 3 now, and then going from there. And then you start bringing in some different structure and going from there. I'm just going to move this around a little bit and show that what they're normally doing here is they're doing all the tech tasks. right? They're doing some configuration, they're doing some training, they're bringing them through the launch process. Do another video later on project management tools and things like that. You should have a baseline plan that you're walking people through and going for that. So this can work for a lot of people, a lot of organizations. But what winds up happening is that you start, especially finance starts saying like, why do we need so many implementation people? And you can use these numbers that we're looking at here, but instead of just multiplying, okay, like we're going 2x next year, so we're going to need 6 people now, and going from there. I prefer to start specializing the roles a little bit, but you might have a hybrid organization. It's what normally winds up working out well, where especially when you have some SMB customers and maybe some enterprise customers. What I'm going to show here is a little bit of this is sort of what a pod would look like here, or 2 separate pods. Notice here, I'm going to remove it from the customer success line of business here. And I'm also going to differentiate what that looks like from professional services. I do like to differentiate those 2 organizations. I would consider professional services. You're doing custom work, custom code, custom integrations, maybe building a portal. You will probably eventually have this all report under PS, and maybe PS becomes its own org and things like that. That eventually winds up going up to a CCO. But for this to look easy and to stop doing all the it depends stuff that we do in CS, this kind of works well. If people have worked on technical projects where you've got like a project manager and then like an old Java developer and now like a Python developer, I like to structure like, and this is where you start getting into this differentiation where you might have had this onboarding lead, might be this person implementation manager. I would probably just create that as the implementation manager and double it over here. This is how I would differentiate it. Perhaps as you're growing your organization, your implementation manager can do everything. And you have these jack of all trade people, and then they can start working on what normally happens at the SMB customers, where you just need one resource to take care of everything. But when you start going into enterprise, you'll start seeing this type of a breakdown here, or this type of a pod, where you've got the project manager, implementation manager, where they are going through and they're watching the project playing. But then for all the technical configurations, this happens to be an engineering type, where they're maybe writing some Python or they're working on an admin panel. Usually in startups, you don't have all of the fancy admin stuff that's going on. And you might wind up needing to be doing some more custom work in the background, config files and things like that. Those types of resources aren't the best to manage customers. So I like to break that up. And then from there, you can scale that. So these resources are usually more expensive. They're usually over $100,000. These might be around 100 or in the 80 range. We're talking USD here. So if suddenly you can get an implementation manager / project manager that can manage more customers, project managing them through, then you're going to have these sort of developer types that can do a little bit more of the focused work. And then from there, you can scale up this number as well, and you don't have to get as many implementation engineers. So that's one way. This is pretty successful for me. Sometimes there's a solution architect as well. They can architect things through as well, and I would just copy this and bring them into this flow. It all depends on how technical your product is. And sometimes people can just go with this onboarding resource, or as we're seeing here, just have a bunch of implementation managers, knock them out in 30 days and things like that. But when you start getting into the enterprise realm in SMB, I would consider this more your SMB role here, and this is more of your enterprise flow. And then you just start taking this pod aspect and then, just copying and pasting and just having more and more of these pods as they break out. They could be vertical pods as well too, as well as regional. And it really just depends on how your organization works, especially if you're selling more as well too. So I hope that helps. I'm really trying to keep these in 10-minute tips, and I think I'm hitting that number right around now. So that's where we are. And fire any questions in the comments and I'll answer them back. And hope you enjoy this and look for some more.